I hear this often when people say, I feel like I'm not a creative person, or, I just feel like I've lost my sense of wonder and curiosity about the world. To me, that's an immediate window into, which parts of yourself did you feel like you had to shut off or disconnect yourself from in order to receive approval, safety, security, and get those needs met in early life.
I dig it up, I dig it up, dig it
up. Howdy, everyone. It's your host, Polly Siegel. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, certified addiction specialist, and master level trained mindfulness practitioner. I own a counseling practice in both Colorado and Illinois, and I specialize in trauma, OCD, and anxiety. If you live in either of those two states, feel free to reach out to me for a consultation and we can begin the therapeutic journey together. Now on to the good shit. Welcome to season 3 of Shit Talkin' Shrinks. Gosh, I'm so excited. I will be featuring experts in the healing space, and we're discussing a variety of mental health topics, the human experience, and society at large, while creating levity along the way. Get ready to laugh, learn a lot, and change your life for good. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Well, when you listen to this, it won't be a Friday. It will be a Tuesday. But for Tallia and I, it is a Friday. I have a very special guest today, Tallia Deljou, and she specializes in inner child work, inner child healing, being able to create more integration, inner harmony, inner peace, and really working towards healing the wounds that follow all of us through time, the childhood wounds, the adolescence wounds, and just probably a lot of attachment injury when you think about it that comes up in our development. And then we find ourselves struggling as an adult and not really understanding, like, why are we struggling so much, when a lot of it is that we need to reconnect with the little one inside of us. So all to say, welcome, Tallia. We're talking about inner child work, inner child healing, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you. That was the best intro ever. It's such a hard concept to put into concise words sometimes. And I think you said it beautifully in a way that I'd say most people can relate to. So I'm excited to see where the conversation goes today and how we can support and offer some resources to those who are listening.
Yeah, beautiful. And I should say that you have a life coaching business, and this is you put your blood, sweat, and tears into this work. And, if at the end of the conversation, you're like, whoa, I really need to do some inner child work, Tallia is a beautiful resource. All of her information will be in the show notes, and you'll have access to her magic. Okay, so I think we got to start with definitions, because I find in my practice, a lot of people are like, inner child, huh? Like, what does that mean? So how do you conceptualize it, Tallia?
Yeah, there's so many, so many ways to answer this question. So I'll offer a couple different definitions, if you will, or perspectives and conceptualizations of the inner child, and you can kind of pick and choose what resonates and what feels good to whoever again is listening. The first definition, the one that feels most closely resonant for me, is that the inner child is the part of all of us who at a very early stage in life started to form beliefs about themselves, about other people, and about life itself. So if you think about, and you can let me know how much we want to get into the neuroscience of this, but if we think about the brain in early life and the development of the brain as a child, we are not necessarily able to digest and process the complexities of life. So when certain things happen in a bit of a repeated patterned kind of way, we are sponges. We are trying to make sense of the world and how to move through it in a way that is safe. And so let's say, for example, your mom at the dinner table, night after night, got her phone on her, and every few moments she's checking her phone. Over time, and this is a bit of a simple example, but over time, that may come to be internalized by a child as work is more important than I am. I'm not important enough to be chosen. Mom doesn't love me as much as she loves work. And so it might create some sort of internalized, again, belief system about my relationship to not just my mom, but to work, where I stand or where I fall in relation to people's priorities. And you can see how that kind of core belief of not being important enough to the person who's your primary attachment figure might show up in later life in the way that you might not feel chosen by people, in the way you might not prioritize yourself because you never had the experience of being prioritized. So again, back to this core idea that you're just inevitably going to have experiences in life that create some core beliefs that you learn to operate by. So that's one example or one definition that I like to offer. The other way to think about the inner child is that it's the part of all of us that holds our most like precious internal resources. So your creativity, your courage, your curiosity about the world, and how, again, inevitably over time, as a result of certain life experiences, those qualities, those resources get shut off, get shut down, get dismissed, don't get celebrated. And so we learn or we internalize those experiences, and it creates essentially a almost like a sense of like disconnecting, right? If I'm coming home and I'm showing my parents my artwork in kindergarten, and and they look at it quickly and they say it's nice, and then they put it away or they throw it away or whatever it is. Over time, I might come to believe that me showing my creative expression, it's not valued, it's not celebrated, people don't care about it. And so being creative is not something that's safe. It's not something that I'm going to pursue. It's not something that is valued. So I'm going to shut that part off within myself. And then again, you can see how in later life, 20, 30, 40, however old you are, I hear this often when people say, I feel like I'm not a creative person, or, I just feel like I've lost my sense of wonder and curiosity about the world. To me, that's an immediate window into, which parts of yourself did you feel like you had to shut off or disconnect yourself from in order to receive approval, safety, security, and get those needs met in early life. So maybe I'll leave it at those two definitions to start and see where else we go with it. But those to me are kind of the first two places I go in explaining the concept and the idea of what this part of us is, and like how it still lives in us in adult life.
What's so beautiful about the examples that you gave is that they don't have the weight of intense neglect, intense abuse, intense, trauma, right? And I think what so many people miss is that they think about the inner child as, well, I didn't have that rough of a childhood. Like my parents were present, they loved me, they provided my needs, they were pretty decent parents. Why am I struggling so much? And I think the examples you gave can show how even just maybe the smallest things create internal imprinting. And that imprinting is deep and it's fierce and it's informative, right, to how the child adult orients to themselves, others, in the world. And so I think what I love is that, like, I'm sure even in the first example, and I feel so grateful to say this because my mom and I have done such powerful work and healing work together. But that would happen growing up where, a phone call was taken as I was saying something that I thought was really important. And I remember having those thoughts. And again, my mom provided us so much because she worked her fucking ass off. I don't know a woman who doesn't work as hard as her. But it's so interesting how the child can then internalize that and not understand the nuances of that because a child doesn't have the advancement to understand it.
Again, perfectly said, beautifully said. And yes, I this is such an important point for me because I find that often people will downplay their own hurt or pain and justify, oh, I should just be grateful. My parents did their best, because there is this idea that's just kind of collectively in the narrative about how, healing and inner child, work and wounds only applies to you if you had a very traumatic childhood. And most of the people who come to me, and in some ways we don't have to get into this, but in some ways this kind of delineates where I would say, come to me as a coach versus go to a therapist. But often the people who come to me did have really great childhoods. They can't point to any one single thing that happened. This really bad thing happened to me. It's often, for the folks that I see, not so much about the bad things that happened, but the good things that didn't happen. And, the more subtle, like nuanced emotional needs that weren't met for whatever reason, mostly because at a very young age, we can't quite articulate them in order to, express them and have them be met, amongst, a whole host of other reasons. But I think it's so important to, expand kind of our lens and make sure people feel included in this work, especially if they can't quite pinpoint again, like the bad thing. And so I love that this came up early on in the conversation, because I do find in the examples I gave, it's like, oh, if we're talking about that, then yeah, I've definitely got some things that come to mind in terms of, messages that I received or things that I saw and witnessed and internalized and absorbed, even if they weren't things that directly, again, happened to me. They still shaped my perception, my self-image, my ability to trust or not trust the people around me. I think, again, it's an important, layer to add into the mix.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think for listeners, whether they've heard this concept and they've done the work themselves, or this is brand new and we're speaking, a foreign language to people, I think it's important to really look at what are sort of the signs that might tell someone, inner child work is necessary. So can you walk us through maybe typical adult presentations or typical adult struggles that might alert someone to do this work?
Sure. Again, I'm like, we got a list of like 100 things we could walk down. And why this is such a like big question, and I don't want to say hard question, but I'm like, to me, and yes, I'm biased, but I'm like, everything, 99% of the things people struggle with and feel challenged by have a root that has in some way something to do with the inner child, which I know is a bit of a bold statement. But to answer your question, some of the signs, the first place I would kind of point people to is to tune into the like dominant, like day-to-day state of your nervous system. That is a great place to start, because it gives you a sense of almost like what your system is wired for, or what your system is expecting, if that makes sense. So if I were to think about, my nervous system, my life, my feelings day to day moving through the world, I used to be very alert, like hyper alert, hyper aware in my environments, very like tuned into how everybody else is feeling, kind of like waiting for something, not necessarily bad to happen, but just very hypersensitive to the energies around me. And so when I think about, again, like from a nervous system standpoint, I was a nervous person. I was somewhat of a little bit of an anxious person. And again, like subtle, right? I wouldn't say I struggled with anxiety, but if I thought to myself, in my day to day, do I feel relaxed and at peace and present? No, that's not how I felt day to day. So I'd say first, again, in a more subtle way, to tune into how your nervous system feels. Do I feel more relaxed, at peace, centered, calm, or do I tend to be a little bit more on the alert, hyper aware, very observant of my environment, tuned into, what's happening and how people are feeling and needing to kind of like adapt or change or respond accordingly. Which also I think ties into the next piece around reactivity, right? If you're noticing certain things continuing to trigger you and kind of elicit these almost like autopilot responses or reactions in a way that feels maybe not necessarily like it's meet, like it's appropriate for what's happening in front of you, but you just kind of can't control how it feels and it's overwhelming, that is also a sign and something to pay attention to.
Can I pause you for a second? Because I think what the second point, the first point, brilliant, right? Our nervous system is a world of information and it tells us a lot. But two, what you said around exacerbated or intense responses, to me, that is when I know my inner child is screaming at me. When I have a disproportionate response to what's happening, and I'm like, why am I freaking out?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that's a moment to be like, she's struggling and I need to be with her, tend to her, love her, whatever it is.
Totally. And I prefer the word you used, and I want to just spend a moment on that. You said disproportionate. I think I said not appropriate. And I do want to correct that because it is actually very appropriate. When we respond in the way we do, and this is such a like core component too of healing the inner child, is understanding that the ways that I'm responding to things, however disproportionate, are make sense. Right? Like there's a degree of like understanding through the work. Of course, I respond in this way. Of course, this activates me. Of course, this triggers me. Once we can connect those dots, it's actually a very appropriate response that I'm having to this thing. That in some ways, like I'm just a part of me is just has learned over time to kind of protect me in this moment. And so I prefer the language, and I think the language is really important around this stuff because often in those moments of being triggered or whatever it is that happens, we can get really critical of ourselves. We can really tear ourselves down. It can be it can make things a lot harder. But if we can see that these, mechanisms that are protective in nature are really just trying to help us out, and we're hardwired at a very early age, we can in some ways ideally come to learn to love them and appreciate them and see their value, instead of again judging and shaming and feeling bad about it.
I want to take a quick pause to talk about our sponsor, a company called BetterHelp. It's an online therapy platform where all the therapists are licensed and accredited professionals. It's affordable. You pay a low flat fee for therapy with your therapist, and it's convenient. Do it at your own time and at your own pace, and you can communicate with your therapist as much as you want and whenever you feel is needed. And more importantly, it's effective. Thousands of people have benefited from therapy using BetterHelp, and we're really grateful to offer all of our listeners 10% off your first month. So if you're interested in receiving therapy ASAP, click the link in our show notes and you can get started. And you get to save money. So was there more signs that were part of your flow?
I've got a lot of folks who come to me, and some of this I think is like the more talked about patterns of like people pleasing, right? When I'm in a relationship, no matter what the nature, I tend to please, I tend to self neglect, I tend to self abandon, I tend to put their needs before mine. I tend to, which again, another way to look at that or to put language to that is I tend to be very attached to needing someone else's approval, right? So if you are able to tune into that, like element of what am I attached to receiving? How am I going about receiving that? Like, what is the belief that I have that in order to get this, I must do this or be this way? Um, and this one's more of a personal, I guess, response or example, but up until very recently, up until I, did the deep work around this myself, there was a part of me who was still very attached to getting a very specific need met by my mom. And every time I saw her, it was like, maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time she'll really tune into my emotions and ask me how I'm feeling. Maybe. And so there was this almost like holding out in this part of me that so desperately needed and wanted and wished for her to be a certain way and to do this thing. And every time she didn't, it would leave me feeling neglected, abandoned, hurt, whatever. Again, just another angle and another way to look at it. But I'll pause there and see maybe what you might want to add to the list as well.
Yeah, I mean, Geez, you've covered a lot of what I would invite a client in my clinical practice to look out for, because it's a very hard concept to grasp that there's a younger version that lives with it inside of you that becomes active in certain moments, because it's like, but it's me. I'm an adult. I'm 30 years old. What do you mean? Like it's hard to conceptualize this. And I think the way that I understand it for myself, and I can share a little bit more about the deep work that I've done, is that in moments when I'm interfaced with something, this could be with a friend, this could be a family member, a partner, anyone that I'm interacting with, and I have this response that just seems very charged, that's the moment where I have to just notice the little hand that was raised. That's kind of how I imagine it, is that a little hand was raised that said, hey, I'm not okay. And that little hand within me is my inner child. And I can feel the difference because the response isn't me, if that makes sense. It's not my wise, adult, sophisticated, savvy self.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like past programming. Like I can feel that. And that's how I describe it to clients, is it's just like this hand that's like, hi, I'm here again. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but that's the only way it made sense to me in my mind.
I love that. Yeah, I love that way of describing it. I think another version of that I'll offer, that might for some folks be more almost like accessible. I think there's the option A, which is like this very young, tender part that's raising, their hand and being like, this hurts. I need tending to, I need love. I need a moment with you. I think often people are also met with, like, the visual I have, again, one being the hand being raised and the other being like a defense, like protective.
Not as vulnerable, but more maybe aggressive or assertive or dominant.
Right. More protective in nature. And I'll keep going with this visual just because it's very vivid in my mind, but often in some ways is informed by, internal family systems and that whole model. But this idea that our inner child at a moment or in a time of wounding essentially gave rise to a protector. So what I want to say about that essentially is if we think about almost like, not to make things more complicated, but two parts that live inside of us. One is the inner child who gets hurt. As a result of that hurt, another part comes in and says, I want to make sure this never happens to you again. I'm going to come in and protect you. So now I've got the inner child that's raising their hand. And then I've got almost like in front of the inner child, protecting it, defending it, is this, security guard or bodyguard of sorts that's coming in to protect. And often I find that there's kind of an interesting interplay between both of these parts of us, so that when we do get wounded, it's reminding perhaps the protector of the wound that the inner child experienced. And so that protective mechanism is going to flare up. Or sometimes maybe it goes straight to the inner child and it does very much touch the wound itself. But either way, I find that to sometimes be helpful as well, because I find that for many folks, myself included, that kind of protective, sometimes angry, frustrated part of us is a little more accessible than the more vulnerable, tender, wounded part itself. And that, again, is not like a blanket statement across the board for everybody, but I like to offer both.
The version that you've shared, I think, is the more obvious one. The tender parts of ourselves can be very hidden and disguised and tucked away for good reason, right? Because they're painful. But, I think what's so beautiful about inner child work, and it has been profound, Tallia, like I'm saying, life changing for me and my healing journey. And I've done a lot of different modalities, as a clinician. I've been trained in different spheres, and it's a game changer. And I think we don't give it enough gravity. Like even in the clinical world, like, yeah, inner child work, it's a buzzword, reparent the little one inside of you, blah, blah, blah. But when you do it, it is transformative on a cellular level. So I'll just give a very quick example. So growing up, I had to, and I share this vulnerably, and I want to also say that my mom and I have done so much healing work, and this is in no way I share this to be judgmental about it, because I actually hold a lot of compassion. But growing up, I had to perform in order to receive love, and I had to perform academically. And academics were not my strong suit. I had a lot of learning disabilities and working memory issues. And so it took a lot of energy in order for me to do well in my performance. And that's the way that I received approval, love, affection. So that messaging, even going back to showing the drawing or mom answering the phone, this is sort of a similar example where my worth and my value became conditioned around if I'm succeeding, if I'm performing, if I'm achieving, if I'm the best, if I'm the greatest, then I'm lovable, then I'm valuable, then I'm worthy, right? And so growing up, I didn't realize, everyone would comment, God, you're such an overachiever. You do so much. You're so impressive. And I'm like, yeah, that's my juice, baby. That's my juice. When really, the inner child is screaming at, I don't feel love just being inherently me unless I'm doing incredible things. And so this has taken a really long time to condition and to rewire that, little one, you are lovable and worthy and valuable by inherently being you. No performance, no conditions. You don't have to do anything. You existing is so wonderful. And so that's the work that I've been doing. And it's not perfect. And I still find myself getting into those patterns of what's the next thing I can do? Well, I could make this better. I could achieve more here. I could make more money. That would make me be more X, Y, Z, whatever, plug in there.
Yeah, I love this example. I love this example. And what I want to add to this too, that I find to be so interesting, is that often with these core beliefs that we hold and these wounds that we carry and these burdens that we're holding on to from earlier on in life, we tend to, there are two things I want to say. One is how much they become a part of our identity, right? I am an overachiever. It becomes something that people then praise me for. So it continues to reinforce and validate and confirm the pre-existing beliefs. It's like, see, this is what people value in me. See, this is the thing that draws people's attention. See, this is why people love me. And the second thing I wanted to add is how so many of these, again, beliefs and wounds that we carry don't exist solely on the personal level. And by that, I mean, they're often almost like forces outside of our own personal experience that, again, kind of reinforce these core beliefs. So yes, in your kind of personal home environment, this was a message received by mom. Also, if we expand it to the cultural level, to the collective level, there are going to be other ways in which these messages are reinforced that are beyond us, that are bigger than us, right? So collectively, as women, what are the expectations placed on us as women, right? As women, we must blank. Culturally, when I think about, being from the Persian Iranian culture, I'm like, yeah, it would make sense to me that pleasing and performing is reinforced on a cultural level, beyond just the personal, what I learned within my own home. If I think of it even beyond that to like the legacy level or the ancestral level, how these patterns existed before me, how I inherited these patterns from my mom and my grandmother and her mother. It's just these, I don't know, these patterns are so woven into the fabric of like the I don't know, the complexities and all these different ways that I think are also important to note, because otherwise we can get, and I find this in myself and I see this with clients, like we get very um, they become very like hyper individualized problems. And um, and I find it to just be helpful to be like, okay, this isn't just a me thing, right? There are layers outside of me, beyond me, that have added to this, that have reinforced this over time, throughout time, that again, just bring me to a place of like, of course, this is a message I've inherited and absorbed. Of course, like this makes sense that I would feel the need to constantly prove my worth in the culture, the time, the family, the place that I live. Like it just, I don't know, adds a little bit of compassion and grace and understanding to the mix that I find to be helpful as well.
Absolutely. And the only way to do the inner healing is through tenderness, compassion, curiosity, exploration, because it is complex. I want to segue into tangible tools section. So if anyone wants to walk away today and start this process, could you give 3 start jumping places? Like where does someone start to do this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll offer I'll offer these different resources, knowing that some might feel a little easier as a step one to folks than others. The first would be, I'm a big fan of writing letters. So the first would be to write a letter, not to your inner child, but from your inner child. So if your inner child, if the younger version of you had a moment to share, to speak, to express, what would they say? Again, as a point of exploration to see if there's anything there. For some folks, that might not feel like a really easy place to start. It's like, well, like I don't even know where to begin. Um, and for anyone who feels resistance to it, I would still encourage you to pick up a piece of paper and a pen and see what comes up. Even if you feel like you don't know where to start, just see.
And it could be any age. I think that's something we didn't highlight. An inner child doesn't have to be 10 and below. It can be an adolescent version. So,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And maybe to get a little bit more specific with that, if someone's willing to kind of just jump into the deep end, maybe like a sub prompt to that would be, if you can think about something that a younger version of you didn't fully have the space and time to process, what is something that they would still like to process, to talk through, to make sense of? What would that be? Where would they go? What would they need the time and space and permission to feel their way through? So that's one direction. The other would be to, oh gosh, I have so many. I'm like, I got like a list of books. I'll offer a book recommendation as well. One of my favorite resources to share book-wise is No Bad Parts, and that's by Dick Schwartz, who's the founder of Internal Family Systems. I find that to be a great, almost like guide and resource for folks who want to get a better sense of like these different parts of me that exist, and these parts of me that are protecting me, and this inner child part of me, and like how to make sense of this like internal. There we go. There's the book. Yeah.
and for anyone who watches the YouTube, I'm holding up the book.
Yeah. So I find that to be a good like foundational way to understand the model, and the model again being the framework for these parts of us that exist inside of us and their relationships to each other, and how to start noticing the patterns. And in some ways, like we didn't talk about this throughout the conversation today, but learning how to separate our parts from ourself and who we really are, and how to become that healing agent within our own system. And then the third resource, I have a challenge, a 5-day challenge that I also love to share with folks. It's again meant to be a place to start. It's 5 days of prompts and exercises, some journaling, but mostly just questions, a lot of questions to just start getting you curious about your inner child and who this part of you might be, and what they hold for you, what wisdom they carry, what wounds they're still holding on to. So for something that's a little bit more guided and facilitated, I would turn people to that. It's 1 email a day for 5 days. And again, just a good place to get kind of the juices going, and get some more of like a guided process of how to connect to this part of me and what to ask and how to listen and see what comes up. So that would be my third resource to offer.
I love it. Okay, so first is write a letter from a younger part to your adult version.
Yeah. Second was the book.
And then the third is your 5-day challenge, which, by the way, we'll put that link to the 5-day challenge in the show notes. So look at the show notes if you'd like to start to do this work. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming on and for having such a meaningful and authentic conversation around this. I know the work is powerful. I know the work is life-changing. I can endorse it because I've been doing it for months. And I can say that it works with clients, right? In a clinical setting, you do, life coaching. That's a little bit of a different setting, but still just as powerful. And so if this felt interesting, read about it, contact Tallia. This is her life's work. But also share it with your friends and families and just anyone who you think might need to do some inner healing with a little one. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
I just want to thank you for opening up the space, having this conversation. It's always, always extra exciting to have this conversation with someone who, like you, has done the work and can attest and who knows the depths of it and is willing to, again, like explore a thing that otherwise is kind of buzzwordy and like, oh no, I don't think that's for me. But I think it's amazing to be able to have these conversations on these platforms to just offer it as a resource because it can be the missing piece for a lot of folks who, tried all the other things and something's still there and I don't know what, but nothing bad happened. So I love any opportunity to just be like, well, have you tried this? Like this, this might be the thing. And again, just connecting to anyone who's also life's work is healing and helping other people move through their own stuff. What an honor. So thank you for having me on today.
Of course. All right. We'll catch everyone later.